Hey, this is video 2 of how does the internet work from a web development perspective. If you're just jumping in now, go back and watch video 1. I'll put links around for that. And let's get into what does the server world look like from a web development perspective? How does the internet work from the back end perspective of the internet? So we narrowed it down. The basis of the internet is browsers or clients, sometimes they're called clients, are making requests to your server, and my server is going to post back responses. My server is 100% responsible for what those responses are. You could say, give me google.com, and my Google server could give you an image, right? You could say mysite.com, and my site could just give you back a CSS file every time. I'm in control of what happens. Let's look at how that actually works. Let me go ahead and drag over. Don't get confused here if this looks a little freaky. This is what I will call a basic website server configuration. Now, there are tons of different kinds of server configurations. If you went to, say, HostGator and sign up for a website package, you're going to get what's called a cPanel. cPanel sits on top of your server. It's software that manages some things for you. And here's what it's setting up for you, is they're going to set up an Apache web server. You're going to get probably a LAMP machine. LAMP it's running Linux. It's using Apache for the web server, MySQL for the database, PHP for the backend language. This is kind of the most popular for anything up to enterprise or, anything up to professional level stuff. If you want a basic website, this is the way to go. It's just easy. Apache as a web server is very flexible. It can do a lot of stuff, but what it's most often used for is just basic serving up of files. Websites, we call them. So here's what Apache does. Apache is the web server program that runs on your server. This square here represents this machine. So this is my machine. This is an actual computer plugged into the internet with an IP address. And so Apache is set up to listen to port 80. Now don't freak out, I just said port. What port 80 is that's the default HTTP port. So if I went to HTTP:// if I could spell, if I went to that IP address, it's the same as going to that IP address :80. So the :80 gives it a port. I can request port 3000, but by default, it's basically going to request port 80. So the reason your computer has an IP address, but you can't go to that IP address and get your files, is you don't have a web server program running. It'd be very dangerous if anybody who accesses your IP address can just surf your computer. That's terrible. So a web server runs, and it will listen to requests, and it will kind of have access to certain parts. So Apache is set up to listen to port 80, and you configure different hosts to different folders. If you remember from our example here, I'm requesting google.com no path. So when I request that, my browser actually goes to the DNS lookup. The DNS lookup sends me to my server. So my server just gets a request to the IP address now, but it still knows from my headers that you're looking for google.com. So Apache knows, mysite.com. Well, mysite.com, let's look in the sites/mysite.com/www folder. And so the basic Apache configuration is just going to serve you files from that folder. That's it. No smart stuff. It's just going to give you files. So when you say mysite.com, it's going to go to the folder that's configured for that website, and it's going to give you the index.html if it exists, or the index.php if it exists. That's pretty much your basic configuration. So you could configure 10 different websites, mysite.com, yoursite.com, oursite.com, and you could make them all look to this folder, or you can make yoursite.com look to another folder on your computer. You can make oursite.com look at this folder. And so that's kind of, Apache can serve, one server can handle multiple websites. So you go to mysite.com, it by default, Apache's website configuration is going to look for the index file. And if you give it a path, say /img/logo2, well then it's going to look at that path and say, well, does that file exist? Let's see if there's an img folder. Let's look in that img folder to see if logo JPEG exists. Hey, it does. Let's send that back in the response. And since that's a JPEG, we're just going to be smart enough to give it a content type of image/JPEG. That's your basic Apache setup. It's going to automatically grab you files, and it's going to automatically set content types for you. And you can configure the content types that you want to return. So that's kind of your basic website setup. If you get a website and you're just building content for people, that's what's going on. Let's look at something more complicated. So Clearly, Twitter doesn't do this. Twitter has to manage users and tweets and all that stuff. They're not just handing you a JPEG file. How does a bigger company handle these things? So they're running what's called a web application. A web application server is set up a little bit differently. So you've got your web application itself. This will be Ruby on Rails, or this will be, if you're PHP, it will be Laravel or CodeIgniter or Node.js. This will be .NET. Your web application right here is set up to respond to stuff. So let's say your web application is also listening to port 80. Let's say I've configured this to